doing this. Name Alivia 143 #hunt. Gender female. Current gender Herm. Age 22. Mental status unstable autistic. Size 5 foot 7 inch. Number of breasts 2. Breast size F cups. Hair color blonde. Current number of tails 2. Blood type O+. Race unknown. Current race Kitsune. Species humanoid. Favorite food meat pizza. Favorite drink demon's blood. Attitude mischievous caring brave accident prone jealous. Diet omnivore. Fur color pink. Belly light gray. Tail tip light gray. Vision 20/15. Eye color various. Wings angelic. Wing color various. Body voluptuous. Status escaped. Alivia 143 #hunt was created in a hidden underground lab on Earth by a lone scientist in attempts to make a assassin that doesn't feel pain and doesn't feel fear and has a natural survival instinct and combat instincts and can survive in harsh conditions. Sadly, the scientist only managed to accomplish giving her natural survival instinct and only a few combat instincts like hiding, being stealthy and staying off the radar, and making Alivia not feel pain externally as she still felt pain internally unknown to him. He gave her the instincts of both wolves and snakes and other abilities such as a extremely elastic-like body and organs, being able to expand to unbelievable sizes, and the ability to fit creatures and objects larger than her inside her. In many ways, months went by and the scientist kept doing tests on her. Over time, the scientist decided to use her in DNA tests, mixing human and wolf and snake DNA, giving her a human-like body but wolf fur, claws, a fluffy tail, and wolf facial features. Knowing the changes put Alivia 143 #hunt through a lot of internal pain, but not caring. Several years went by and the scientist started getting lonely. One day he came into the room that holds all the test subjects drunk, doing a usual checkups to make sure nothing's wrong. Seeing his newest test subject, he got the idea no one will care if he has a little fun with her. Not like anyone knows where the facility is and what's being done here other than the people he works for. Not long after, he turns off the machines keeping Alivia 143 #hunt dormant in the pod and opens the pod, pulling her out and cleaning her off in one of the subject showers before taking her to the built-in medical bay to have his way with her, being too drunk to remember the chemicals keeping the subjects dormant need to be constantly pumped into them to work. Alivia 143 #hunt starts waking up as she's laying on the medical bed. She fully wakes up, looking around and sees the scientist taking his work outfit off and everything else. Alivia 143 #hunt, with her natural survival instincts, decides her best chance to get out of wherever she is and finding out what's going on is with this drunken fool. Using her animal instincts, she chooses to act like she's sleeping still. As the man starts to turn around and walks up to the bed, she leaps at the man, knocking him over and hitting his head on the nearby counter, rendering him unconscious. She gets to her feet, still rather wobbly. After a bit, steadies herself and grabs the scientist's keys and ID, unlocks the storage room. Not long after, finding some medical IV tubes and tying the scientist up to a chair with the tubes, and gathers up the rest of the scientist's clothing and heads to the nearby shower and cleans herself off. Afterwards, puts the scientist's lab coat and shirt on and rolls the tied up and unconscious scientist to a secured room with no cameras and a comfy bed, and ties the scientist's legs up and then ties his arms and legs to the chair, making sure there's no way for him to get loose, covering his head with a sheet. She then decides to lay down and rest, letting her body filter out the rest of the chemicals from the machine she's been in for 17 years, and quickly falls asleep. Time passes and she wakes up fully rested, dry, and no longer under the effects of any of the chemicals. To her surprise, the scientist hasn't woken up yet, so she takes the sheets off his head and walks and sits in a chair across the room, proceeds to wake him up by tossing a small beaker at his head, shattering it on his head, jolting him wide awake. As he looks down, seeing his arms and legs are tied to a chair, he looks up, seeing the pink wolf girl sitting in a chair with her arms crossed, holding a sharp scalpel and one of her legs crossed, glaring at him from across the room. He starts to panic, no longer drunk with a slight hangover but clearly able to register what kind of problem he's in. Alivia 143 #hunt gets up out of the chair and walks over to him, still holding the scalpel, kneeling down by him, and starts asking him where they are and what the facility is and what the hell he's been doing to her and why holding the scalpel to his neck. The man gulps before telling her they are in a hidden lab 5 miles underground and that he was assigned to create a super assassin to use to send in to take out would-be major threats quietly and stealthily, and refusing to tell her who his employers are, she tries to force him to tell her after a while. Alivia 143 #hunt gets frustrated and tired of trying to get this fool to answer her. She tosses the scalpel down and gets up and starts to walk away. The scientist not to say she made the mistake of leaving him alone and tossing the blade on the floor. He starts to tip the chair over and wiggle over to the blade. Grabbing it with one of his hands, he cuts the tubing, tying his hands to the chair, and not long after cuts the rest of the tubes. Getting up holding the blade, he plans to attempt to stop Alivia 143 #hunt from escaping the facility. He finds her in the halls heading to the elevator and sneaks up on her and stabs her in the back as she falls down to the floor limp, bloody and lifeless. The scientist starts to drag her back to the pods, unknown to him that she's playing dead. She then quickly flips over, kicking the scientist really hard in the crotch. As he lets go, she grabs his head and knees him in the face, knocking him onto the floor. Moments after, she leaps on top of him and pins him down, her eyes glowing red in hate and anger. Without even thinking, she opens her mouth and swallows the scientist whole, trapping them inside her like a snake swallows a rat. After a minute or two, she snaps back to her normal self and looks down at her large extended moving belly in total shock at what she just did and the fact she flat out enjoyed it and enjoys the feeling of the now helpless scientist inside her. Digesting burps not long after, and for the first time since she was created, gets a massive wave of pleasure wash over her as the scientist starts to panic inside her, feeling the burning acids eat at him in her belly and the air start to get sucked out as she burps. Alivia 143 #hunt then falls back from the pleasure, not knowing what this feeling is. She starts to make her way back to the elevator. As she gets in, she feels the scientist stop moving and go silent. She then looks down at the ID, seeing the man's name was Sean, and stops for a moment and burps again, licking her lips. She looks back at her belly and says, "Thanks for the first meal, Sean, it was absolutely delicious," giving a smirk as her belly gurgles, digesting the scientist. Afterward, looking at the wall in the elevator, she sees a slot that looks as if a card's supposed to be put in, so she slides the ID into the slot, and moment later the panel on the wall splits open to reveal two buttons, and she presses the top button and the panel closes and spits the ID back out and the doors close. She pauses for a moment in case something bad happens and then feels the elevator start to ascend and relax, laying on the floor stretching as she enjoys her first meal ever, rather shocked at how fast she has digested the scientist. Seeing that her belly is now 4 times smaller than it was before, as she sits she falls asleep. Hours pass in the small elevator before it lets out a loud ping and comes to a sudden halt, waking Alivia 143 #hunt. Instantly looks down to see her belly is back to normal size and burps and stops, feeling something start to force its way out her mouth. She then gets on her knees and bends over, hacking and coughing, and suddenly some fabric starts to stick out of her mouth. Unsure what it is, she starts to pull on it and to her shock pulls out a pair of underwear that the scientist had on and tosses it in a corner of the elevator before hacking and coughing to get the rest of the remains of the man out of her. 5 minutes pass and eventually there's a pile of human bones in one corner of the elevator along with blue undies, and Alivia sits in shock staring at the pile of bones she just coughed up. That once was Sean. An hour passes and Alivia gets up and brushes the suit off she has on and notices the scalpel lodged in her back and pulls it out, splattering a bit of blood on the walls of the elevator. Yet not feeling any pain or loss of blood, she then tosses the blade into the pile of bones along with the ID and turns to the elevator doors, pushing a button on the wall that started glowing red. The doors open, revealing the outside world to Alivia. She then turns to the bones and says, "Well, it's been a lot of fun, Sean, but I think this isn't going to work out," and walks out of the elevator. 2 years pass after that and Alivia has been working as a delivery girl, making do with what money she can to pay the bills for the house she lives in and buy food with what's left, not really getting her much food. The next day Alivia gets a phone call from her work being told that she's fired for assaulting a co-worker. She says okay and hangs up the phone and grins, knowing who this co-worker is because she broke his nose and arm for trying to molest her in the parking lot. She then walks outside and grabs a newspaper and sits down at the table. Not long after, the lights in the house go out and she sighs and says, "Damn it, not the damn power again." She puts her head in her hands and cries a bit, saying she just has to find a way to get more money to pay these bills and get herself something other than ramens for food. She then wipes her eyes and starts looking in the newspapers for other ways to get money for the bills and food, finding a bunch of ads about a medical pharmacy willing to pay people good money to test experimental drugs. They have Alivia nearly starving and with no job and no money to pay the power and water bills, decides to go to the places on the ads and volunteers to be a test subject. Test after test, nothing bad seems to happen, though some interesting things did. One of the drugs she took seemed to affect her eyes in a strange way, making them start to change color depending on her mood. She kinda liked that and didn't complain. She then told the people what they did And they thanked her and gave her a check for $400 happy for the money and the new interesting eyes. She shakes the manager's hands and thanks him and walks out the door. She then heads to the next building on the advertisements and talks to them. She sits down and they get the drugs they want to test. And she lets them inject her. They wait a bit and nothing seems to happen until Alivia starts to feel a sudden pain in her shoulder blades and falls out of the chair. The doctors then notice two rather strange hard rock-like protrusions that just formed and are sticking out of her back. Out of curiosity they cut holes in the back of Alivia's shirt to reveal two large clear crystal-like lumps oozing out of her back. They then get a small hammer and something to chip some of this crystal off her to look at it under a microscope. Not long at all, finding that Alivia's pain receptors have linked with the lumps, and she yelps in pain as they chip pieces off of the lumps. Although not used to feeling pain, Alivia kinda likes it, thinking if you can't feel some form of pain you're not human at all. The doctors come back and are shocked to see the spot they chipped away. It has already fully healed and looks as if nothing was missing. Turning back to Alivia, they start to tell her that it seems the crystal lumps are organic partly and seem to be a part of her. They tell her to come see them after a few months to check in to see if any new changes appear, and she agrees and they hand her a check for $140. She thanks them and walks out, heading to the last place and talks to them, and again she just sits waiting for them to bring the untested drugs out, and she's shocked when they come out with 4 bright red bottles with a rather sinister looking logo on them. She starts to get a bad feeling about the drugs, but knowing she needs the money she doesn't say anything and lets them inject her with the drugs. Time passes and nothing seems to happen, and she shrugs and looks at the doctors and says, "I don't feel any different." They look at her and frown, and she asks what the drugs were for, and they say they were told they are for helping with specific mental defects. And seconds later Alivia's blood goes cold and she turns pale when she hears they had something to do with mental deformities. The doctors notice this and ask if she's okay, and she snaps back as they touch her arm, grabbing the one doctor and snarling, looking them dead in the eyes with now 2 glowing hellfire red eyes, and says in a evil tone, "Don't ever touch me," before flinging the doctor back across the room as if he was as light as a feather. Both the male doctor and the other 3 then turn and stare at Alivia as she falls to her knees, and 2 fully grown crystalline wings form out of thin air. On closer inspection they seem to be made of sort of reanimated petrified skin cells and frozen water forced into fully working crystal bat wings. Looking back at Alivia, they see her mental state has changed from what seemed to be a pure evil state to what seems to be a less hostile but evasive state, moving away every time one of the doctors try to touch her, saying, "Back off. Do not touch me, and I don't want to hurt you, but I will if you don't back away." And again her mental state changes again to something strange as Alivia falls to her knees again, and her face turns bright red blushing and the wings on her back change to a bright pink. And as Alivia looks up at the male doctor, they see her eyes have done the same thing, and she starts messing with herself in front of all the doctors, still looking at the male one, and says, "Hiya cutie, did I do that to you? I'm sorry, why don't we go somewhere private and I maybe make it up to you?" and winks at the man. As the other 3 doctors look at him, he gulps, looking at them a little aroused and terrified at the same time at what just happened. All 4 back away from Alivia and turn back to look at her as her eyes turn white and blank and her wings turn colorless, and she just sits there on the floor saying nothing. Looking at the man, when they ask if she's okay, she answers back that she's fine, says she doesn't feel any pain or emotion or anything. When they ask her again, to their shock her eyes turn green again and her wings turn transparent and vanish as she falls over flat on the floor with a thud. The doctors, still terrified at what just happened, knowing it's their job to make sure she's okay, rush over to Alivia, lifting her up and taking her to a room with a bed and shine a light in her eyes. Seeing that she's out cold, they get a blanket and cover her up and keep an eye on her, taking blood samples and making sure nothing bad happens. 4 hours pass and Alivia wakes up sitting up on the bed, grabbing her head and moaning before looking over at the doctors in the room, seeing the looks on their face, and she says, "What? Why are you looking at me like that? What happened? How'd I get here in this bed?" The male doctor then takes a seat near Alivia and starts to explain what happened the best he can. Alivia's face turns pale and her blood runs cold when they tell her about the first mental state she went in and how damn hostile it was, and how it was able to toss him across the room with one arm as if he waked nothing. And then she relaxes a bit when told about the next one, and blushes when they tell her of the third. She looks flat out confused when told of the fourth one, and the man then tells her about what else happened, and she nods and says sorry to the man for tossing him like a rag doll, before getting up and getting her stuff. And the man hands her a check for $2,000 and says, "This is for any problems we may have caused you to go though in the future." And Alivia looks at the check and grabs the doctor and hugs him tight, tearing up, saying thank you so much. The man hugs her back before Showing her to the door and waving goodbye, Alivia then heads to the bank to cash her checks, then heads to the power and water building and pays her bills and heads home, laying down and reading the rest of the newspaper before jumping up after seeing the advertisement for CENTCOM saying they are now hiring and welcoming anyone to join and get to explore space, meet new people and assist any way they can. She then jumps up off the couch and grabs the phone and calls the company and asks if they got a position open and that if so she will take it. Afterwards she gets dressed and heads out to her new life and new job, telling herself she will tell no one of what happened that day at that hidden lab. She then walks into CENTCOM and lets them do the tests they need to and scan her into the company data banks, and she receives her ID and PDA and walks into the shuttle, and thus begins the new life of Alivia 143 #hunt.
I will pay you to kill yourself.